Welcome and good afternoon. My name is Kamish Orr, and today I wanted to talk about lineups, setting lineups for your tabletop baseball game. I'm actually doing a payoff pitch league right now, Baseball Maelstrom, which you probably know if you're on this channel watching. But for those of you who don't know, it's a team. A league made up of 8 teams, 4 in the American League, 4 in the National League. 3 of the 4 teams are Hall of Famers, so they're made up entirely of Hall of Famers from that league. The 4th team in each league is made up of players not in the Hall of Fame, so great players not in the Hall of Fame from that league. And so I kind of was just interested to see how Hall of Fame teams would stack up against non Hall of Fame teams. I'm not using, because it's a mixed, it's a drafted league, if you will, and not actual teams. I'm not using as played lineups or as played rosters or as played pitching rotations and all of that stuff. So if you are using as played lineups, then this probably isn't as applicable to you. But if you're somebody who is playing a tabletop baseball game and setting your own lineups and that kind of thing, I just kind of want to have a conversation about how you go about doing that. So personally, what I did is once I had the teams set, is I went through and created a typical lineup like you would think. You put your high on base guy, or maybe somebody with speed in the number one spot. A traditional lineup, we'll call it. You have your power hitter in the cleanup spot. Your best hitter on the team, possibly in the number 3 spot. Number 2 is a guy that can get the leadoff guy over to second, or kind of a typical lineup. I know lineups have changed from possibly typical usage. Like the Yankees had Judge leading off this year for a lot of the time, and he wouldn't be a typical leadoff hitter in a traditional lineup, but that's where they had him. To get him more at bats because he was just crazy. And after the first inning, really, that the lineup kind of goes out the window in a sense that your number 1 hitter is going to have the most plate appearances, obviously, more than your number 2, and so on. So maybe it makes some sense to have your top hitter in the number 1 spot. But I don't want to get into theory of lineup creation in this video necessarily, but I just want to talk to you about the way I did it and why I did it. So I have a schedule that I created so that each team could play the other teams a fairly equal number of times, and no interleague play, by the way. And so I'm on April 13th, actually, in this season, and I just had my first off day for teams. So on the 12th, I had 2 teams in each league that were off. The other 2 teams are going to get an off day on the 15th here. And so now that I'm 11 or 12 games into the season, I thought I'd take a look at the lineups and see how players were doing and make adjustments. This gave the teams enough time to kind of have a set lineup for a while, and I didn't want to be tweaking the lineups every game necessarily, but kind of give them some time I know 11 or 12 games is still a pretty small sample size, but still give some time to see how players were doing before I switched things up. I do have separate lineups against right-handed and left-handed pitchers, but anyway, so let's take a look here. We go to Boston. By the way, I have a Google sheet or Excel sheet for every team that kind of has their ratings, the players by position, their ratings, pitching, rotation, that I can kind of keep track of everything. And then I have the lineups over here for me to use. So I've already adjusted these lineups. So I had a typical right-handed and left-handed lineup over here that I had been using. And I guess my first question for you is, and leave this in the comments, the difference, I guess, with tabletop baseball is that unlike real life, in tabletop baseball, if a player gets on a hot or cold streak, the card isn't changing any. the card is the card. It's not changing any. So, in one sense, statistically, you should always start a player that has a better card over a player that has a worse card, right? If we're going just straight statistically speaking, because the cards don't change. So if a player's on a hot streak or cold streak, that's just because of the way the dice have fallen, not because the player card has changed. The player isn't inherently better or worse. I know there are some tabletop baseball games that make some adjustments for hot and cold streaks. So, obviously that wouldn't apply if that's the case. But for the most part, for the tabletop baseball games that don't make those adjustments, the card isn't changing. So the question I have for you is, do you still switch things up and pull in another player with a worse card, if you will, over a player with a better card, knowing that the card itself is worse, just because the better carded player is having a worse streak, if you will? So that's a question that I have for you. I try to treat it like I'm an actual manager would. And so I am actually going through and not trying to factor that in as much. Obviously, some players are so much superior than others that even in real life, they wouldn't be swapped out, one for another. So in those cases, I'm not swapping those out if it wouldn't make sense in real life. But in a lot of cases, the differences are more minor than that. So yeah, so you have when I look at the players here, I have their actual stats broken down, so I can see how they compare right-handed versus right-handed to left-handed pitching. So let's look at. I'll just use Ted Williams and Carl Yastrzemski. Unfortunately, Carl Yastrzemski is behind Ted Williams, or they're on the same team, the same position, same primary position. And so, barring the unexpected, it would never make sense to start Carl Yastrzemski over Ted Williams, because for the most part, Ted Williams is just so much superior, especially against lefties. Ted Williams is just way better than Carl Yastrzemski. So in that case, I probably wouldn't swap regardless, barring injury and that kind of thing. But in other cases, the differences are more minor. So you have Carlton Fisk and Biz Mackey, Negro League player, and you can see that Fisk, his average against righties is a little lower, but his on base is higher and his slugging's higher. Against lefties, again, Fisk's average is lower. His on base is quite a bit higher, but his slugging is way down against lefties. So in that case, it's not as clear cut. So what I did was I use Ballstat for keeping track of my stats, and I pulled up the custom report. We're just going to look at Boston since that's who we're just looking at, and we can get Boston's hitting against lefties and against righties. And so I factored in. We'll go against righties here, and I factored in. This is probably going to be hard to see on the screen, but I factored in how well the players have been doing so far, and use that to adjust the lineups. So Carlton Fisk against righties is only hitting 200. I mean, it's only 35 at bats. Again, small sample size, I understand, but so far Fisk is not hitting well. He's only hitting 200. Frank Thomas is only hitting 222. So if we look at the righty lineup, even though Frank Thomas against righties is actually massively good, according to his statistics that year, he's DHing against righties, by the way. So Lou Gehrig's actually playing first, but Frank Thomas is DHing. Even though he has great on card stats, if you will, I moved him down to the number 7 spot because of the fact that he's only hitting 222. He's just not hitting very well against righties. Fisk is the worst on the team, so he's in the number 9 spot. Gehringer was just a little above Fisk, and so he's in the number 8 spot. So I made adjustments based on their hitting so far this year, but I didn't totally throw out the fact that the card isn't changing. So players that have outstanding cards, I didn't necessarily pull from the lineup. The other thing I'm trying to work with here is that, it's a Hall of Fame team. The Boston Splinters are a Hall of Fame team. So even the backups are going to be pretty good in most cases. So I also want to see the backups get some playing time. And I have them arranged on the bench for pinch hitting purposes, but I'm not doing a ton of pinch hitting unless it's, you're at the bottom of the lineup, somebody's 0 for 4, you have men on base and they're behind or whatever, and you need some runs, then I'll switch some players out. But I'm not switching pinch hitters out constantly. But anyway, that's just kind of the way I've done it. I've gone through each team, kind of reset the lineups at this point, now that there was a break. And based on how well they're doing, but also the fact that their card isn't changing. So I didn't totally throw that out. The other thing that I think happens sometimes is that, there are patterns in dice rolling. So even no dice are completely random, if that makes sense. No dice are going to be completely random, but they're going to be random enough that you probably can't predict what's going to happen. But if I have a player that's always like in the number ones, maybe a leadoff hitter, like Ty Cobb, for example, in this league, isn't hitting well. And so I moved him out of the leadoff spot because of the fact that he wasn't hitting well, even though by the card he should be really good as a leadoff hitter. And so some of it, I think, is switching players around in the order so that they're not in the same spot in the lineup, so that those patterns, underlying patterns, even if they're not noticeable, can kind of get kind of come into play in a different way, if that makes sense. So that Cobb not being in the number 1 spot, maybe he'll have better luck in another spot because of the way the patterns of the dice fall. The number 1 hitter's just not having good luck or whatever it may be. Again, I know from a statistical point of view that shouldn't matter. Unless the dice are truly unbalanced, that shouldn't matter. But I think from a realism point of view, or trying to treat this as a real games instead of a simulation, if you will, then I think a real life manager makes those adjustments. So I've tried to do that. Anyway, I think that's where I'll leave things. Let me know in the comments, how do you set lineups? How do you swap out players? Again, if you're not using as played lineups or as played pitching rotations and all of that, how do you switch up players knowing that the underlying card isn't changing? Do you still switch players up if a guy's in a slump? I'm guessing most of us do, but I'm curious to hear from you guys what you do in those cases. So leave me that note in the comments. If you have any comments on the league, you can head over to baseballmaelstrom.com to follow the action on the league. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have about the league. And until next time, thanks for watching and have a great evening.